work too. And when I was preparing for this message, I was instantly transported back to when I was like 17, 18 years old. It was right before my senior year, and I went to church camp. It was the second year I joined this church camp, and so you make all your friends at church camp, and everybody kind of remembers each other from year after year. And so I had gone by myself, and I had kind of got this reputation. It wasn't a bad reputation, but a lot of people knew me, right? Like, yeah, I can see why. You're kind of loud, a little obnoxious. I was that way then. Like, God really hasn't changed me yet. You guys like laughed and like nodded your heads a little too much. Yeah, right? So my younger sister went with me, and it was the first time that we were both going to be on camp together, and everybody then immediately knew her because, oh, you're Ben's little sister. So I remember we were in the tabernacle, and the guy got up and he was talking about, kind of asking questions. This is the same idea of what he was saying is, as a generation, we've become biblically illiterate. Like, we know how to read, but the problem is we're illiterate when it comes to the things of the Bible. And he said, here's a great example. He's like, who knows the guy that built the boat and had all the animals that went into it, and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and everybody's kind of sitting there nodding their head. And I remember my sister, she stands up and she said, Moses! And I immediately slumped down, man. Now, for most of you, if you may not know, it was actually Noah. That was Noah, right? And so I was like, so he turned, I remember he pointed to my sister, and he was like, you're right, we don't know, who's in the Bible. And he, points to me, and he said, Ben, you need to teach your sister something. And I was like, and got called out by the pastor, right? At church camp. And so that's the reason why we're doing this. This is the reason why we're going through and kind of connecting the dots and looking and saying, right, in the lines of these biblical characters, as we start to go from Adam and Eve, now all the way to Moses, how everything is so interconnected. If you remember, last week we talked about Israel was oppressed, that what really happened was it was several generations from Joseph. Joseph had a good connection with Pharaoh. Well, Joseph had died, Pharaoh has died, and there's 2 or 3 Pharaohs since then. And Pharaoh looks at how God has blessed the Israelite, this nation of Israel, and now they are a mighty populace. They said there were 600,000 men, not including women and children. If you do the math with everybody, the biblical authors, the people think that the number would be closer to 2 million people. There was a group of about 40 that went into the land of Egypt, and now God had blessed them in several generations, about 2 million people. Pharaoh looks out and he goes, hey, this is a problem. If our enemies come and the Israelites side with our enemies, we'll be destroyed. And so it was through these series of events that God raises up Moses and puts him in this position for such a time as this to lead the people away from Pharaoh. But we're not there yet. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Exodus chapter 2, and on the back of that sheet, this is a great place where you can take notes. And really, we're going to look at about 6 verses today. And it's kind of weird, how this is kind of played out. Sometimes I think we look at 6 to 8 chapters. Today we're going to look at 6 verses. So in your Bibles, Exodus chapter 2, starting with verse 10, it says, as the child grew, and she, this is Pharaoh's daughter, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter. We'll get to that in a minute. As she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, so she called him Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. One of the things that we had talked about last week, that only God can orchestrate, right, how Moses' mom actually raised him until he was of age to be able to come into the family of Pharaoh, right? It would be kind of cool, as a mom, God's going to pay you to take care of your children. Look at that, wait, is that still valid today? If so, can I sign up for that? I just thought that was the natural process of what you're supposed to do because they call me mom. Well, God sets it up, and so he's not killed, but his mom is able to raise him, to train up a child in the way that they should go, so when they're older, they will not depart from it. This is very true in the life of Moses. Because we stop there in Exodus chapter 2, verse 10, and before we get to Exodus chapter 2, verse 11, this is one of those instances where we become biblically illiterate and we don't really understand what's going on. From verse 10 to 11, there's 40 years that takes place. All right, so many times in the Bible, because this is just the next verse, we just read on and we kind of miss everything that would take place in those 40 years. So you start to connect the dots. When Stephen, this is in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, chapter 7, verse 22, Stephen is standing in front of the Sanhedrin, and they're about ready to martyr him. They're about ready to kill him because of his faith in Jesus Christ. And this is what he says in Acts 7:22. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in his words and his deeds. When we look at Hebrews chapter 11, what we call the heroes of the faith, it says, Hebrews 11:24 and 26. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, where he looked for his reward. So you look at what's going on in the life of Moses, chapter part 2, in those 40 years from 10 to 11, one of the things we have to realize is here he is and he's inundated with culture. Right? It would be the same idea. There's some friends that we know from another church who are getting ready to adopt some children from Ethiopia. Right? And if you can imagine the culture shock that these kids are going to come to. Right? Ethiopia is completely different than America. Our customs, our cultures, the things that we do, the things that we don't do, right? And so they're going to have to choose, and this is what kind of happens with adopted children, is they're going to have to choose how do we remember who we were while we're becoming who we are, right? Moses, he has to remember who he was. His name is Moses, that he was drawn up, that he's set up to be the leader of this nation of Israel, but he's not being trained to be an Israelite. He's not trained to be a Jew. For 40 years, for all intents and purposes, he's an Egyptian. And again, here's one very tangible thing to think about. The Egyptians were monotheistic, or they were polytheistic. So poly means many, theistic means gods. So here he is for 40 years being trained to be polytheistic. Again, what would happen was they weren't as educated as we are today. And so we understand the seasons, and we understand life cycles, and we understand how rain comes, with the storm clouds and all this. We can explain all this stuff scientifically. Well, when you don't have science to be able to explain it, and you look back and you say, every year here in America about September, right, October, the sun goes away. And for a year, for a week after week after week, we have much more darkness. It's darker and darker and darker. So what we have to do is offer sacrifices to the sun god that hopefully that he will come back, right? And every March, about 8, 10, it starts to get longer and longer. And you're like, we're looking at it going, what's called, the equinoxes, right? That there's equal amounts. Then other times it's the vernal thing, that we have longer days. And so we can explain this logically and scientifically. But what Moses was being trained is, we offer these sacrifices because we don't want to upset the gods, and there's this cosmic balance that everything kind of plays out, right? And so for 40 years he had to say, am I going to be polytheistic, worship many gods, or we look at what's the definitive things as Christians and the definitive things as Jews, is they're monotheistic. Mono means one, theistic means God. So is he going to worship just one big G God, Yahweh, who is the author, the perfecter, the finisher of our faith, the Alpha and the Omega? Or is he going to be polytheistic and conform and adjust and live as he was an Egyptian? Do you see the struggle that he has? For 40 years, he's living this struggle out every day. But what Stephen says, what the author of Hebrews says, is no. I don't think he did that. Why? Because, again, it's a very short verse where it says that Moses' mommy got to raise Moses until he was of age before he turned them over into the temple. What happened during the formative years of his life is, I believe, his mom is pouring into him the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Worship the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, that there are no other gods. Right? Something happened early in the formative years of his life that when he became of age, he rejected the polytheistic way of the Egyptians, and he chose to follow the monotheistic way of the Jews. one of the things that I start to realize in the life of Moses early on is, again, if you've gone through and seen The Prince of Egypt, if you've gone through and watched the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, you kind of have this idea that Moses was probably big and strong, that he was good looking, that he was able to do things by himself. And have you ever noticed in our lives that really all we are just the summation or the compilation of the choices that we make? So every time we come to the crossroads in our lives, are we going to choose to become more like Christ and follow after Him? Or are we going to do things our own way and become less like God and more like ourselves, become more dependent upon ourselves? Because that's what I see, again, in this heart and mind of Moses. It never really says at what point he came to the realization that he was going to be the leader of the Israelites. Next week we'll look at the lessons in the desert, and there's the burning bush experience. But there's something that has to be going on in his life, because we read in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. Now it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he's looking at this, realizing that there's some oppression and something deep inside of him kind of breaks. Right? That is not right what's going on. And as opposed to looking and saying, what is God going to do about it? I think he asked the question, what am I going to do about it? And I'm realizing in this thing called Christianity, this thing called life, everything is intention. Go ahead and just pull on your fingers, right? Pull. This is group participation. Feel the tension. You feel it? I'm going to go like this and just pull, right? Can you pull your hand? That's what I find in the Bible, right? Because on the one hand, I believe that God does light a fire within us, right? And then He fans that flame that we're to do something, right? And we do something to the glory of God. But there's instances where we can't do it on our own power. So you see the tension. Because I'm sure Moses is looking, saying, I need to do something because it's not right for this Egyptian to be beating my brother, this fellow Hebrew, this fellow Israelite. But as opposed to looking to God, we see this, that he looked this way, then he looked that way, and he decides to kill the Egyptian. Wow, that's pretty telling. The way that it's written, right? It says he looked this way, and he looked that way before he killed the Egyptian. So we naturally ask the question, why would he look this way and then that way before he killed the Egyptian? He's looking to make sure no one's watching. Right? I think back to years in my life when I know I was going to do something wrong. What do? My mom had this terrible habit of baking cookies. And she would bake them when I was at school. And I would come home. Many times in my life, I would come home. And I'd walk through the front door, and the aroma would have filled the entire house of fresh baked cookies. Right? And immediately, I'm ready for an after-school snack, so I can hear my stomach. Actually, I think it was saying, eat the cookie. Right? And so I was like, yeah. And undoubtedly, my mom would meet me at the front door. You know what she would say? Don't eat the cookie. These are for the guests that are coming over. I was like, all right. But before long, I would look this way. And I would look that way. And I would pick up the cookie and try to go. And I swear, I promise you that she either had like some closed circuit camera in our house, or she literally does have eyes in the back of her head. Because every time I would go, and put the cookie in my mouth, she'd walk in, she'd be like, honey, did you have a good day at school? Because now you have a cookie in your mouth. What was the best part of school?